Boa noite. Só um pequeno aviso antes de começar. Vamos ter tradução simultânea da conferência hoje, então quem não pegou os fones, eles estão disponíveis na entrada do auditório, ok? Boa noite. Estamos então dando início à nossa última conferência, último debate do nosso ciclo Diálogos em Economia Criativa. Agradeço enormemente a presença de todos vocês. Agradeço novamente, como estou fazendo em todos os inícios, os parceiros envolvidos na realização desse extenso programa de atividades, ao British Council, na figura do Martin Dovey, aqui presente, ao People's Policy Project, na figura do querido Paul Heritage, aos professores Andy Pratt, Geoffrey Crossick, muito obrigado pela disposição de vir até o Brasil. Agradeço também ao Ministério da Cultura, um grande apoiador e parceiro do Necult, na pessoa da Ana Letícia Fialho aqui presente. Agradeço sobretudo as equipes envolvidas, e não vou evidentemente citar nomes, porque corro o risco de esquecer alguém, mas todos os bolsistas do Necult, e aproveito para agradecer a todos eles na figura do Gustavo Miller aqui, que está operando o computador nesse momento. As equipes do People's Policy Project também, que talvez estejam nos ouvindo por streaming, live streaming, à meia-noite, não, às 11 da noite em Londres. Você pediu para eles ouvirem? Então tá, então eles estão, às 11 da noite, ouvindo. Bem, é com um grande prazer que esse momento encerra uma semana bastante cheia de atividades, debates, reflexões. Nós, de certa forma, começamos esse trajeto que até aqui, agora, hoje, em São Paulo, num evento realizado pelo British Council e o Fórum Brasileiro de Direitos Culturais, no qual começamos esse debate sobre o valor da cultura, que teve presente ao longo de toda a nossa programação. Então, para essa mesa, esse momento de finalização, nós estamos recebendo aqui o professor Andy Pratt. Ele é professor de Economia da Cultura na University of London, membro da Royal Society of Arts, da Royal Geographical Society, e um importante especialista internacional em indústrias culturais. E Andy é, de fato, um pesquisador, pensador, professor referencial no campo da economia da cultura e indústrias criativas. Certamente todos aqueles que estudam o tema ou dialogaram com o tema conhecem, em alguma medida, o trabalho do professor Andy Pratt. É um grande prazer recebê-lo. O professor Geoffrey Crossick, que é realmente uma autoridade no âmbito dos estudos ligados ao valor cultural. Geoffrey é professor de Ciências Humanas da Escola de Estudos Avançados da University of London. Também tem uma ampla atuação como reitor, vice-reitor e diretor de importantes instituições ligadas à pesquisa acadêmica e, além da pesquisa acadêmica, à ação aplicada no campo cultural e no campo da economia da cultura. Professor Geoffrey é também autor e responsável por um relatório de extrema importância que se propõe a partir de distintas nuances teóricas, compreender a dinâmica de produção do valor cultural. Além do professor Geoffrey, recebemos aqui o professor Paul Heritage, que eu, de certa forma, aproveitando da intimidade com o Paul, subverti um pouco o que a gente havia planejado para essa mesa, porque hoje à tarde nós tivemos a conferência do Paul, alguns de vocês estavam aqui, e eu, ao ouvir o Paul falando, encontrei tanta relação direta com as falas dos professores Andy e Geoffrey, que eu tive que pedir para o Paul trazer alguns elementos daquela fala da tarde para a noite. Eu achei que aquilo precisava ser feito, e eu falaria algumas coisas, então não vou falar, para deixar esse espaço para o Paul falar. Farei uma mediação e farei alguns comentários, se houver espaço, se for oportuno. O Paul Heritage, o professor Paul Heritage, coordena o People's Palace Project. Para quem não estava aqui, eu apresentei o professor Paul longamente hoje, mas eu gostaria de repetir alguns pontos dessa apresentação, sobretudo para dizer que Paul é, na minha opinião, um especialista em construir pontes entre o mundo acadêmico e a ação prática real no âmbito da cultura. Sobretudo, associando temas e áreas como inovação social, vulnerabilidade social, indústrias criativas, economia da cultura, economia criativa, e sempre numa perspectiva de imensa sofisticação do ponto de vista da reflexão teórica e da compreensão da diversidade cultural nas relações entre Brasil e Inglaterra. Paul é professor da Queen Mary University e também está diretamente desse tema do valor da cultura, a partir de um approach muito sofisticado. Bem, a ideia geral é que nós tenhamos as 3 falas de aproximadamente de 20 a 30 minutos. Vamos começar pelo professor. E a partir disso, dessas 3 falas, nós abriremos um espaço, como de costume, para perguntas e intervenções. Muito bem? Geoffrey?
Works. Thank you, Leandro. I don't know what you said in the first half of your comments, because the translation system wasn't working properly at that point. But I was listening to the translation. The system wasn't working at that point, but it is now working very well. And I heard your introductions to us, so thank you for that. And thank you to you, Leandro, and to Neckelt for the invitation to speak here this evening. I've known Neckelt for some time, since Leandro and I first met each other last year. And I've got to know a lot about Neckelt, and I just want to say that it's an important and very innovative organization, one that I think is enormous, something that Brazil and Porto Alegre should be very proud of. It has a huge international reputation, and I'm absolutely delighted to be here this evening to talk at a Neckelt event about the value of culture. The value of arts and culture has been discussed since ancient Greece and has rarely been absent from debate. But in the last 25 years, it's their benefit to the economy above all else that has come to dominate discussion in Britain, in the United States, and in many other Western countries. Employment and tourism and expenditure by cultural venues and the multiplier effect of all of that on the wider economy are pointed to by advocates for the arts. Although there's been a great deal of dissatisfaction with the narrowness of these as indicators of the value of arts and culture, and various attempts have been made over the years to broaden what was captured by economic approaches to the value of culture, the basic claims about economic impact have repeatedly been made. And that led Robert Peston, who was at that time the BBC's economics editor, to ask, sorry, they're in the wrong order. Never mind, doesn't matter. It led Robert Peston, then the BBC's economics editor, to ask if we could conclusively show that the economic impact of the arts was zero, would we stop children from learning to draw? Now, however much, and that for me captures much of the issues we need to talk about, however much the methods that generate these indicators are refined, a basic question nonetheless remains. How can we expect simple measures, whether about the economy or about other areas, to indicate the value of something as complex as the experience of arts and culture? Cultural value is not an absolute, where the challenge is to find the right way to measure it. It's a dynamic construct which changes over time as discourses, including policy discourses, change. And that was the context in which the UK's Arts and Humanities Research Council asked me in 2012 to lead its new cultural value project. The project was set up to consider and identify the value of arts and culture to individuals and to society, and to consider how we find evidence about that value. The project funded about 70 research projects, drew on a much wider research literature, and its report was published last year, 200 pages long, but with an executive summary for the faint-hearted. And I hope that some of you will want to follow it up. The report tried to help reshape the debate about the value of culture, to question claims that couldn't be supported by adequate evidence, and to highlight neglected ways of thinking about the subject. It focused on the UK and other Western countries, and you'll judge how far the issues I raise resonate for Brazil. I hope that my broader reflections will do so, even though the detail may differ. Detail will doubtless differ on the role of different cultural providers between Britain and Brazil, the social diversity of cultural engagement, the way commercial culture is seen, the discourses and practice around minority ethnic culture. All of these will have different resonances in Brazil and Britain. Brazil is a distinct, complex country with distinct, complex cultural structures. But I hope that the issues I want to raise this evening will seem relevant. And from my meetings so far in Sao Paulo and now in Porto Alegre, it does seem that what I have to say does resonate in significant ways with people in Brazil. There are four fundamental questions that must be asked about any discussion of cultural value, whether it's in the UK or Brazil, and my talk will be structured around them. The first is who wants to know and why? The second question is what is the phenomenon whose value we're trying to understand? Thirdly, are we looking in the right places in our search for value? And fourth, By what methods should we find and evidence that value? These are four big questions. And in the 25 minutes or so available, I can do no more than sketch the importance of each. But before I do that, I want to highlight a key theme of the report, and that is personal experience. Personal experience has generally been neglected in Britain as a source of the value of culture. What happens when you or I visit a museum, watch a play, read a novel, join a community arts event, make a quilt, play a video game? The report argues that personal experience, as an individual or as part of a group, is the root of much cultural value. And the neglect of personal experience in discussions of cultural value might be due to a distrust of phenomenological approaches. But that neglect has weakened our understanding of the difference that arts and culture makes. Personal experience matters because cultural value does not reside in an artifact, in a performance, or in an event. Cultural value resides in the process by which those are engaged with by people and audiences and communities. Cultural value, in other words, is to be found in processes, not in objects. Let me now return to my four questions. And the first is, who wants to know and why? This matters because all questions derive from a context, and that context must be understood. In many Western countries, value is shaped in order to secure funding from government for the arts. And those making the case in Britain, therefore, do so in terms they believe that governments want to hear, which mostly means talking about the economy. The new Labour government, which came to power in 1997, added other objectives for culture. Not just the impact of arts and culture on the economy, but also the positive benefits for urban regeneration, for social inclusion, for community cohesion, for health, and for many other areas of social policy. It provoked the wonderful response by Britain's best-known potter, Grayson Perry. This pot will reduce crime by 29%. The instrumental case for the arts was mostly about objectives that could be achieved by other means, and the case rarely compared outcomes with other ways of delivering the same social objectives. There's an alternative approach, one that begins with what arts and culture irreducibly do, but that was rarely taken. And the cultural sector therefore vacated the territory on which such an argument could be built. Instead, it made the case for public funding in terms that governments wanted to hear, with bold claims and quantitative evidence. But there's more than one reason to collect evidence about the difference that engaging with arts and culture makes. There is research carried out by academics better to understand the phenomenon. There's evaluation, organizations as part of accountability to their funders. And there's reflective practice, with arts practitioners and organizations reflecting critically on what they've been doing in order to improve their own practice. The three different categories obviously overlap, even if their objectives differ. But arts practitioners and organizations, in my view, are especially important because they're the most neglected. Surely they should want to know whether their objectives, their artistic and their social objectives, are being met. But in Britain at least, evaluation is essentially seen as being done to meet the accountability requirement of funders. And so to my second question, what is the phenomenon whose value we're trying to understand? This varies greatly with structures of cultural provision and funding models, and with national discourses in relation to arts and culture. The fact that in Britain, the debate about value has focused on provision subsidized by government means it's about national museums and galleries, theatres, orchestras, dance companies, opera companies, and also about mostly smaller arts organisations funded through Arts Council England, which is an arm's length body which receives its funding from government. This focus on government funding means debate about arts and culture neglects commercially provided culture. It neglects culture provided by third sector organisations. It neglects amateur and participatory culture, which together constitute the great majority of cultural experience. Enlarging the focus to include these requires us to ask different questions and to look in different places for evidence of value. In the West, for example, virtually all film, literature, music, and games are provided commercially. And amateur engagement vastly exceeds the professional, as ordinary people make textiles or paint in their leisure time join drama and music groups, make digital content online, and so on. There is, of course, a little studied ecosystem where these simplistic boundaries between government-funded, commercial, amateur, third sector turn out to be very permeable. Shifting the focus to other forms of cultural provision also forces us to ask more about the digital transformation of cultural experience, not just access to commercial culture through streaming and downloads, but the co-creation of content as digital platforms, social networks, online niche communities all change the way that culture is produced and performed and experienced. In this myriad of ways, discussion of the value of culture has been much too compartmentalized. Enlarging our focus in this way immediately opens to view the diverse locations, the diverse places where people engage with culture. Yes, major galleries and museums, concert halls and theatres, but also small-scale spaces, such as design studios, live music venues, institutions such as care homes and prisons, as well as while traveling, at home, and through the virtual space of the internet. In the West, the home is in fact frames most cultural engagement. In Britain, 94% of all film is watched at home, while the great majority of music is listened to at home or while traveling. Film and music and television and craft and literature and video games, as well as digital online cultural activities, are all mostly experienced at home, yet we never take proper account of that. Virtually all of this is commercial or amateur. The relation between these forms of provision and their location will of course be different in Brazil. The components will be the same, but their relationship may well vary, along with their place within a discourse about value. That unless we explore the value of all cultural engagement, we cannot begin to understand why it is important. And as researchers and as cultural practitioners, we need to understand the difference that culture makes before we ask the secondary, albeit important question about why some of it should be funded by the government. Publicly funded culture then assumes a much more interesting role, embedded in an ecology in which the commercial and the publicly funded and the amateur all support each other, with public subsidy enabling key parts of that ecology to function. Enlarging the role of cultural experience that we explore also changes the way we think about access, challenging what I call a deficit model in the approach to arts participation. By a deficit model, I mean the model that asks who is missing from publicly subsidized provision, but without asking about the cultural activities that those people who are missing, often from disadvantaged and minority ethnic social backgrounds, what they're actually engaging with rather than what they're missing from. And in Britain, this broader focus captures streamed film, music on YouTube, television, crafting at home, sharing photos on Flickr, singing in a church choir, and much else. It's not that there is no popular culture. It is simply that these people are not as present as others would like them to be at publicly subsidized culture. Inequalities of access, of resources and infrastructure certainly matter. And I'm not saying they don't, but we should ask what cultural activity people are engaging with rather than where they're missing. And that means giving value to other than elite and publicly funded culture. And so to my third question, which asks whether we're looking in the right places when we look for value. Giving priority to data on economic and social policy objectives distorts our understanding of value. And even in conventional areas such as the economy or cities or education, it leads us to focus on the wrong things. The report has 6 separate chapters on each of what we call the components of cultural value. 2 of these, which we call the reflective individual and the engaged citizen, are discussed first in the report because they're often neglected. The other 4 components may be more expected: the economy, cities, health, and education. But in each of those other 4, we start where possible with personal experience of arts and culture. It's true that personal experience as an individual or in social settings is harder to capture with quantitative indicators, but it's often a key to understanding. I could deliver an hour's lecture on each of these components of cultural value alone. So what I'm going to say will be very compressed, but will give you a taste of what I think is really important and how it might change our approach to the value of culture. Let me start with the most innovative, the reflective individual and the engaged citizen. A long chapter explores how arts and culture help shape reflective individuals, facilitating greater understanding of themselves and their lives, increased empathy with respect to others, and helping appreciation of the diversity of human experience, cultures, and peoples. The report draws on research on very diverse topics. These include the journey undertaken by offenders in prison, a journey that's prompted by arts and cultural activities which open up a sense of uncertainty and options in a prison world where only narrow certainty exists. If it doesn't in itself stop people reoffending when they leave, it begins a process known as desistance, by which offenders see themselves differently as people with choices, and that's the journey they have to go on. Or in Oscar Wilde's parable, The Doer of Good, a figure walks through a city and sees the very ambivalent results of his previous good deeds. They don't seem to have led to good outcomes. Discussing that short parable led doctors to confront their assumptions about what it means to try to do good and the difficult behaviors that often leads them to. Or there was the humanizing of residents with dementia in the eyes of their professional carers who engaging together in craft activities in care homes. There are the psychological studies that demonstrate people are becoming more empathetic through reading literature, or how reading literature aloud to each other in small groups enables vulnerable, damaged people with little history of reading to reflect on their own experience and think about their own identity. These all show the power of cultural engagement to help reflection and empathy. And a key to this is what we call aesthetic distance. What I'm looking at, what I'm experiencing, is not real, but it feels like reality. And that power of aesthetic distance is what helps consideration of difficult dimensions in all our lives. A related component considers how arts and culture help produce engaged citizens, promoting civic behaviors such as voting, joining civil society organizations, volunteering. And it also helps articulate a broader and often critical political imagination. Let me highlight just two very different British examples. We organized a workshop to bring together arts organizations who work with communities on climate change. And the workshop concluded that if art was not used didactically to teach people, but rather as a stimulus for reflection and debate, it could significantly influence people's willingness to change their behaviors. A very different example saw young people using artistic graffiti and light shows in public to challenge planning decisions in their own neighborhoods. What cultural engagement does is it helps translate abstract ideas into narratives on a very human scale. And by doing so in a way that's open and non-didactic, it disturbs us and it forces us to reimagine our own assumptions. Let me now turn briefly to the other components of cultural value, where the claims made have often looked for that value in the wrong place, or too often in places where simple numbers could be found and presented as evidence. With respect to the economy, we must look beyond economic impact, where methodologies and results are open to serious criticism. We must concentrate instead on other benefits. And these more relevant benefits might include the way a vibrant cultural environment supports the creative industries, recognizing that all too often advocates assume a connection between the vibrant cultural environment and the creative industries without seeking to understand how that connection works. We visited the Marquis 51 Collaborative House in the Creative District and saw how musicians, live venues, festivals, recorded music, and music entrepreneurs form there an ecosystem that allows each to succeed. On a very small scale, that seemed to me an example of that link between cultural vibrancy and the creative economy. Another example of the impact of culture on the economy invites us to see arts and culture as part of a wider innovation system, shaping a population that is challenging and creative in the wider economy, generating spillovers that links arts and culture and the creative industries, on the one hand, to other parts of the economy. Or there's the part played by a lively cultural environment in creating conditions that attract talent and investment to come to a city. These all seem to me so much more important for the economy than the economic impact assessments that dominate discussion. A broader vision is also needed for towns, where too much attention has been given to regeneration, whether through new infrastructural investment in concert halls or galleries or through new creative and cultural quarters. Culture-led regeneration, however, is frequently accompanied by gentrification, as more prosperous residents are attracted in, and by the rise of the experience economy, where outsiders come for the buzz and the cafes and the shopping. But a corollary of that is the disruption and the exclusion of communities, as those who live there and those who produce there are forced out by rising property values. Major culture-led regeneration projects, whether large new infrastructure or creative quarters, may improve a place, but they rarely improve a community. In contrast, smaller scale cultural assets seem to have a much more positive effect on neighborhoods. The work of the Social Impact of the Arts project in the United States has shown how small commercial, community, and participatory arts, such as design studios, or small music venues, or community arts groups, are associated with more sustainable social benefits and may constitute a more balanced and organic path to regeneration. Today, we made a fascinating visit to the Creative and Cultural Center at Villa Flores, and it showed the development in an ordinary popular area, which seemed to be embedding itself in its neighborhood. The survival of such projects, however, is something that doesn't always happen, and I hope the Villa Flores does survive. When it comes to the benefits of arts and culture for health, there's a tendency in Britain for government to focus on financial savings from clinical arts therapies. These are important, but they won't yield savings on a scale needed to show the importance of the arts to health. Instead, we should focus on the use of arts to deal with mental health problems, or the use of art and design to produce better healthcare environments, where both patients and staff feel ownership and empowerment, and the substantial evidence of how community arts organizations can improve social inclusion and mental health. And there are, of course, the enormous benefits of cultural engagement for older people, as well as for those living with a dementia. Well, as I've ranged across the various arts and cultural engagement and the way it may produce benefits to individuals and society, one issue has kept coming up, and that is that simple quantitative indicators can narrow and distort our understanding. Let me make it clear that quantitative methods are very important in areas where they provide appropriate evidence, but they're not in themselves more rigorous or more appropriate than other forms of evidence. And that is why my fourth question, my final question, is so important. By what methods should we find and evidence the value of arts and culture? If we're interested in methodology, we must start first with my first three questions that I've already asked, because only in that way can we see how context and purpose determines the character of our investigation. And only in that way can we see how the complexity of the variables involved interact. And only in that way can we see why we must capture the personal dimensions of engagement. Only when we've considered those issues can we ask whether we're asking the right questions and using the right methods to answer them. Now, the search for measurable indicators, for numbers of value, derives from a wish to start with what can be counted, rather than to ask what we're interested in and how best to evidence it. And here lies the seductive attraction of using simple quantitative indicators. The success of art in prisons is measured by reoffending rates. Effects on the economy are tested through economic impact studies. And arts education in schools by narrowly defined standardized tests, when the real benefits in all these areas are known to be much more complex and much more interesting. If we're trying to capture the wider value of culture, we must be open to a much broader range of methods and of evidence. Not only that, we must also question the hierarchy of evidence and methodologies, a hierarchy that places at the top quantitative data, the experimental method, and randomized controlled trials. Understanding the difference that arts and cultural engagement makes to individuals and society may, on occasions, involve establishing causal relationships. But linear models of cause and effect can only be found in very precise situations to answer very precise questions. Most research on arts and culture, and indeed on many more human and social phenomena, can only show an association between variables, not a causal link. And yet the randomized control trial and the experimental method are regarded as the gold standards for evidence in areas for which they were not devised. The equal validity of methods drawn from other disciplines, not least those in the arts, humanities, and qualitative social science, must be recognized if we're to make progress. Well, broadening our questions in such ways therefore requires a wider range of methods. We need to recognize the rigor and relevance of qualitative approaches, such as those drawn from ethnography, history, hermeneutics, or arts-based methods. Arts and humanities approaches contribute fundamental elements to the mix of methods we must use. They introduce the analysis of meanings and representations, the exploration of historical parallels and experiences, the close reading of texts, of language, of images and performance. Without arts and humanities approaches, there's a great deal we will never understand. And methodological rigor is just as present in these disciplines as in the sciences, but it's a different rigorous approach, often better suited to the complexity that characterizes arts and culture. Let me just mention a few examples from research we funded through the Cultural Value Project. The Reader organization brings together in small groups people who've had lives damaged by abuse, drugs dependency, and mental health problems. By reading aloud to each other from works of literature, people with little background in reading start talking about their own lives and experiences. The research on that was done by meticulous reading of transcripts from the discussions in the reading group, using approaches from literature and linguistics. There's the use of focus groups to learn how people valued public art in a particular English coastal town, using visual images to provide a non-verbal stimulus for discussion. Or ethnographic methods have been used to examine an improvisatory dance group for older people in northeast England, which helped them reflect about themselves and their identity. Or there's a historical approach which compared late 19th century and late 20th century discourse on museums in Manchester in order to understand the way they changed and the way they hadn't changed, illuminating our understanding of museums today. And a final example I want to give took a war memorial to people of the Sikh religion who had died fighting for Britain. It's a war memorial near Brighton on the south coast of England. And they use historical and literary analysis to understand the different layers of meaning and value attached to it by those who participated in its annual ceremonies. Now, none of these understandings of value that I've just summarized could have been achieved without the methods of arts and humanities, nor could they have been researched without case studies. The depth that is provided by case studies must be compared with the breadth provided by large-scale data capture. Each brings something to our understanding. Rigorous case studies are one of the great strengths of what the arts and humanities brings to society's knowledge and understanding. And they may be the first step towards creating both sensitive and scalable evaluation methods, enabling us better to understand the underlying processes and how they're shared across different contexts as value is created. In calling for the valorization of arts and humanities methods, I'm not decrying those of science or quantitative social science. I'm simply saying that there is no hierarchy, and one approach should not be privileged over others. Nor am I decrying the use of econometric methods to capture value. We funded some important work on that. What matters is that methods be appropriate for the understanding that is being sought. Indeed, if we're looking for the value associated with specific cultural organizations, cultural initiatives, or cultural programs, we must often turn to multi-criteria analysis that brings together findings from a variety of approaches. And devices such as the balanced scorecard, developed for business but now used much more widely, exist precisely to bring together different criteria without losing their separate meanings. So, let me sum up. There is no single measure of cultural value, but a complexity of experiences and benefits to individuals and society that we must try to capture. Let's abandon the belief that a continuous refining of methods will give us secure answers. We must insist on rigorous application of any methods we use, but we should abandon the search for the Holy Grail, for a simple measure or a simple set of measures of cultural value. There is no Holy Grail to find. If we want to understand what is going on in arts and cultural engagement and the value that derives from it, then we must use a diversity of methods and diverse sources of evidence. Because what we're mostly exploring is complex interventions and complex experiences in a complex world. That's why my 4 questions are so important. But let me finally offer a parting thought. In our work to understand and value culture, we must remember my very first question: why do we want to know? The answer must be to evidence and report for a variety of purposes. And I say this because one of the dangers inherent in sophisticated methods of value is that they become the target to be achieved by an organization, an initiative, or an investment. Once the sophisticated measures become targets, we've lost the risk and the uncertainty that is at the heart of cultural practice and cultural experience, whether for a large opera company or for a community arts organization or for the development of a commercial video game. Creating spaces for uncertainty and for change is what makes culture so essential to our societies. My report was written before the rise in Europe and the USA, and in some parts of Europe, of a new type of popular politics resting on slogans and certainties rather than questions and reflection. The capacity of the arts to engender nuance and questioning is even more needed today than it has ever been in the UK, in Europe, and the USA at least. And I suspect that's also the case for Brazil. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, thanks very much. What I want to do, hopefully, is to follow on from Geoffrey, offering a different perspective and to try to, I guess, convince you that one of the important things that we need to do in this process is have an understanding of what culture and the creative industries are if we want to approach a measurement at all. So the points that I've made here raise this question of why is it so difficult to say something about the cultural economy, how we understand the the concepts, and also how we might select, as Geoffrey mentioned, the right measures to use in a particular context, and to understand the objectives for which we're engaged in measuring. And I guess the point that I want to make that runs through this presentation is that the objective that my work has been trying to do and try to push forward is the objective is to deepen our understanding of the cultural and creative industries. So deepen our understanding of the breadth and depth of the experience of making and remaking culture. And that is not simply finding the first set of data that might be an appropriate proxy for indicating the growth or decline of a particular area of activity, which is invariably the thing that policymakers want, a simple
indicator, as Jeff mentioned here. The other point is that if we look at much of the data that is available on the cultural sector, quantitative or qualitative, we might be led to, or we might be wearing a blindfold, because much of the data really doesn't illustrate the range of experience and activities that cover the cultural and creative industries. So part of the job for us as social scientists and also of humanities scholars is to make visible the activities of the cultural and creative economy. This making visible means to actually give voice to a number of the different activities and give some sort of indication, whether it is quantitative or qualitative, of those activities that otherwise are hidden to us. And without this understanding, that we can't actually make any rational decision about what it is that we want to measure, or whether one measure is better than another. I guess the other point that I just want to make in general here is that in contradistinction to Jeff's focus on value of culture, I view this as a social construct, which isn't opposite to what was being said there, but that there is a value that people engage and interpret, but there is also an economic trace and a set of activities that runs around and behind any cultural production. And that activity produces jobs, it produces economic output, it produces economic activities. So there is, in addition to the value that we attribute that gives meaning to our lives and gives us a chance to reinterpret our lives through culture, there is also an economic value as well. You cannot reduce one to another, okay? But the economic value at least ought to describe what goes on in the cultural field. And I guess part of what I've got to say is how we can enrich that understanding and actually then provide some more appropriate economic indicators. But those economic indicators will be the indicators of the material practices, but the immaterial understanding, the process of value making, will be on top of that. So I'm giving you the bare minimum of the value, but the value that we get from it as human beings will always exceed that value. So I just want to point out the importance of figures and the importance of having some measure of the material activity of cultural and creative economy. Some of the work that I'm going to refer to later was produced for UNESCO and the UN Commission on Trade and Development that sought to get an understanding of cultural trade. And of course, one of the things in the global economy that nation states are very interested in is the value of trade. And you can get the interest of politicians if you can make them understand that there are certain things that may increase the livelihood of citizens in a nation state. So cultural trade is an important thing to try to give us some measure. And one of the surprising things that we were able to develop in our understanding of cultural trade, and don't forget this is just a minimum understanding of cultural activity. It doesn't say anything about the psychic cultural value. It simply is the trade in cultural goods, that they contribute a significant amount to the global trade in activities, and for nation states that is important. Something that is very important about this is that it's not just the trade exists, but that trade in cultural goods is growing. And it's growing at something like about 12% in the developing world, and about 8% in the rest of the world. Now, growth figures such as that are those that we associate with something that happens in China. Yeah? So most of the economy is growing, if you're doing well, at something between 1% and 2%. So the fact that the cultural economy is growing in this way tells us something that, that economies are changing, that our livelihoods are changing. We are valuing, in the economic sense, we're valuing culture more. We're using culture more. And I think this transformation is one that I've sought to try to capture and try to understand, that in the past 50 or 60 years, there's been a massive transformation from the way that we understood culture in the nation state, of things that we might support as culture, as patrimony, as heritage, etc. That is a component, but in relative terms, that has become a smaller and smaller component of what the cultural field is. And the cultural field is, as Jeff mentioned, includes things such as film, television, computer games, etc. These take up more of our time as individuals. And Jeff mentioned that a lot of that is consumed in the household. What I want to focus on is the fact that it's taking up more of our expenditure. It's also taking up more of our time, and it's actually generating an economy in producing those goods. These are important points. And that economy is creating jobs. And in many countries, between 8 and 10% of jobs may be associated with cultural production. Now, that's a very significant number of jobs and livelihoods associated with, if you like, the raw materials of culture. And on top of that, there is the value that we gain from that, and that we discuss about the value of, for example, one film associated with another, one book associated with another, that is not captured in the strict economic value in this way. So these things are important because they provide us a route way in to gaining an interest and an understanding of the culture and cultural economy, that it gives us a measure, but it's based on an understanding of this broader sense of how the cultural economy actually operates. What I want to point out here is actually, what do we mean? I've been using this word, this term, cultural economy. What do we mean by this? And if you look at the left-hand side of the screen, I can take you through some of the changes in the way that we have conceptualized or begin to understood this cultural economy. I mentioned a few moments ago that the view of 50 years ago or 60 years ago would be that culture was the things such as either the what we might have regarded as the elite arts and culture, but also the things that symbolized the power or recognition of a nation state. And they may be things such as particularly important monuments, either particularly important representations, or in terms of, it might be songs or writings that capture for us some meaning of culture that represents the state. So these debates about patrimony and culture, and often is what nation states say, we need to preserve that activity. Yeah, because it represents us. Now, there are big questions about whether that actually represents everybody, or whether it is an idea that helps us, corrals us, or encourages us to think that the nation state is part of this coherent culture. But nevertheless, we see a lot of the discussion in that sphere. In the period of the 1960s, where we had the development of a lot of popular culture, which often was seen in contradistinction or in opposition to elite culture, that this was seen as becoming important, providing new cultural meanings that often were not always in alignment with what the nation state wanted, that provide a whole range of other meanings that often mobilize social movements around them. The discussion of the the cultural industries was to try to capture an understanding of what had happened in terms of the emergence of forms of popular culture, culture that is produced in these forms through music, through film, a whole variety of activities that was not being provided by the nation state as classical art galleries have been, but people were actually buying music. They were supporting new musical forms or new artistic forms generally. And these developed activities in whole industries and provided jobs. This was a massive transformation, a sector of economic activity that hadn't been in existence before. And researchers tried to capture this notion of the cultural industries to understand this process. They chose the term cultural industries in opposition to a term that had been used previously by people like Theodor Adorno, who had referred to the culture industry. And for him, the culture industry was all that was bad about new culture. That there was culture, which was high culture, and then there was the culture industry, which was the industrialized churning out of simple copies which were inferior and therefore would make the population or would serve the population with an inferior form of culture and therefore had to be opposed. And interestingly, for Adorno, some of those types of culture that needed to be opposed were such degenerate forms such as jazz, photography, film, cartoons, etc. So life moves on. Okay, so there's a lot of activity that that reminds us of how cultural forms change and transform, and our judgments of them may need to change and transform, and our analyses of them. So the cultural industries were an attempt to capture that. A later period in the late 1990s, as Jeff mentioned, in the UK, we had a government who was trying to reinvent itself, as political parties often do. The Labour government tried to reinvent itself by branding itself New Labour. Yeah? So this was different to old Labour. Yeah? And these rebranding activities gave it an opportunity to try to connect with the youth. And of course, youth, culture, politicians, put them together, and surely you have something popular. So the creative industries was part of a rebranding. And I would argue, and have argued, that the creative word really is not all that helpful in our analyses of these areas. It will be difficult to point to some activity in our lives that is not creative in some way. Okay, so to say creative industries might refer to everything. In fact, it referred to a specific group of activities that, again, we get back into this process of producing indicators for policy models. Okay, so the creative economy is a variant of the cultural industries, but it was one that was developed very much for a particular policy environment. The way that the new Labour government used it, it was only focusing on the for-profit activities. Okay, so it didn't cover that field that we would generally refer to as culture, which was the not-for-profit area. The debates that have happened since that time have tried to link together the cultural field and the creative industries, and have seen them as part of a wider ecosystem that are linked together. And this is really important, that it's changed our conception of culture. Something that previously, to an extent, culture was about an individual with a genius artist in some way who would produce a piece of great art. Yeah? What they forget, and what we always forgot, was when we looked at Michelangelo, that actually he had a whole team supporting him, mixing his paints, preparing his canvases, even doing many of the drawings. So there was a sort of industrial process of producing these masterworks. Okay, so it wasn't just the artist; it was to do with the whole set of group of people around the artist who facilitated the activities. But also, you have another group of people who were the people, the clients, popes, etc., and also other audiences who had to learn what it was to recognize great art. So audiences need to be made as well as artifacts, and that involves a wide range of people. So the debate about the cultural industries has been very much about trying to include a wider range of people and to understand all of the people that constitute the making of culture and the understanding of culture. So the idea of this broader notion of cultural making as being an important focus for us in terms if we're going to understand culture, let alone measure it. Okay, so just to give you an example of if we were thinking about film, for example, we often have a lot of focus on film stars, but of course, all of the people that were involved in making a film are those that you see on the credits at the end of the film as you're walking out of the cinema. Yeah? All those people were involved. Were it not for those people, then the stars would simply be standing there alone, naked, as it were. Yeah? Without the costumes, without the sets, without the filming, without the editing, without the voice coach, without the person to look after the animals and to feed them and all those activities, they are a constitutive part of this performance. And likewise, as I referred to before, even as simple, apparently, as a piece of fine art, requires this bringing together a whole range of activities. And if we turn that idea around, it's also quite important that actually to understand the possibilities and the potentialities for individuals to make and create cultural expressions, often they need this supporting activity of other activities or other materials in order to actually pursue their cultural aims. So with that in mind, it's really important that we don't run down the traditional economic track of only looking at the activities that figure in normal economic transactions. So we need to include the formal as well as the informal activities, as well as the for and not-for-profit activities. Those that are about cultural production as well as those that are about cultural consumption. Bringing in this broader framework allows us to have a more comprehensive vision, I think, of what we understand by culture, its making and remaking in societies. So one of the important points that we've tried to get across is that when we think about the cultural economy, we should not think about artists alone or film stars alone. What we need to do is understand all of the activities, the ensemble that makes possible any cultural expression. This tells us something about what's involved in making a work of art. It tells us about issues associated with what sort of training and education might be involved. It also tells us that audiences are an active part of any artistic engagement. The story of the starving artist in the garret room at the top of the house who dies for their art with no food and no audience is precisely this false representation of an artist who doesn't engage with their audience. In order to be a successful artist, or even to be an artist in any case, one needs to speak to other artists and audiences. One needs to have a discussion about your painting in relation to others' painting. Artists are social beings, and we need to have that social world in order to understand this process. So this is what the cycle of cultural production here is meant to represent. Of course, we have creation as an important part of it, but it is only one part of a continuous cycle. That creation, that great idea that you have sitting in the bath, goes nowhere unless you actually take it on to an audience, unless you actually make something based on that idea. So the idea that you have then has to be turned into a model, into an example of a sketch, etc. Yeah, and even that idea then often needs to be reproduced in some way, either one time or many times, to convey this to a wide variety of people. And those artifacts then need to engage with a range of people and to be exchanged either for their time or for some amount of money, whether they exchange it in the shop or whether it's an exchange of ideas in a theatre or performance in some way. That exchange itself is a critical element that moves on, when you think about a performance or the immediate thrill of experiencing a work of art, then later on you have a reflection on it. And just in this way, that the process of cultural production, and an important part of it, is the way in which we reflect on it. So the process of critique and the process of archiving, where we look at what other people did, because all art and culture is a conversation. Its value is relative to what other people have said and other occasions. So therefore, the process of education and also of archiving is what museums do, it's what libraries do, but it's also what academic institutions do. Yeah? So this repository of ideas that allows us to interrogate the past, interrogate other people's ideas, and have a conversation with them, is part of what keeps art and culture alive. And it's part of an ongoing conversation. And it's a critical conversation. It's one that gives rise to change and transformation. So that's why this circle of cultural production becomes, if you like, a spiral, a never-ending spiral of change and transformation that goes and stimulates people after they've been in the library to look for inspiration, to create anew their new ideas. This is the process by which fashion designers or musicians always are exploring the archive of previous material to get inspiration, not simply to copy. The copying may be helpful in terms of learning the skill, but then to apply the skill to new ideas is the transformation that takes place. And my point is that we need this understanding of what we call the cultural economy in a broader sense that isn't just about artifacts and it isn't just about artists. It's about a social environment that we constitute that enables cultural production and keeps it alive. And therefore, these are the sort of things that should prompt us and say, what would it be sensible to provide some measurement of to tell us how this process was happening? Not the first measure that a government minister wants, or the measure that happens to be available in the national statistics. What we need to do with this process is actually an understanding of the process. What will be the appropriate measures that would tell us about these things? And one of the things by carrying out this sort of exercise that we can do is to identify that most of the existing measures of culture that we have only measure part of that activity. So we may have figures on the number of people attending a performance. We may have a number of figures about how many artists there are, but it doesn't tell us about the activities that you do. It doesn't tell us about the broader process of production and the networks and the groups of people and the time that they spend involved in not only perfecting their work of art, but exchanging and interrogating other people as well. This gives us a broader understanding. It makes visible a whole art world that didn't exist if we only looked at these limited measures. Secondly, it also encourages us to go and ask the people that carry out the surveys and censuses to actually collect some relevant data that actually tells us something about the arts. If you look at national censuses of either occupations or of industries, and you look at the criteria that is used by the census collectors, so they can put it in a particular box, so they can put a number there, then that's called the taxonomy, the way that the activities are broken down. If you look at, for example, areas of shoemaking, yeah, there are about 30 different categories of activities associated with shoe manufacture that will be associated with making the laces of the shoes, making the soles, making the uppers, and all the different components that goes into a shoe. Yeah? Because that's when the censuses were devised in the early part of the 20th century, when people were still making shoes, lots and lots, in factories, and they were an important part of manufacturing activity. Compared to that, if you go and look for the category that's associated with computer games, it doesn't exist. There is no data on computer games in the national census, and therefore, in this strange world of economics, where if there's only if there's data there, can you do some calculation on it? Computer games doesn't exist. Yeah? And for politicians, it doesn't exist in this way because there's no data collected on it. Now, of course, it's an absurdity because we know those activities exist. In the way that I was talking about them before, they are invisible. We have to make them visible. We have to collect this information. We have to understand what it is to make a computer game. We have to understand which occupations are associated with that, which economic transactions are involved in those activities to make them visible, just in the way that we did in a former time to make visible the work that went into making shoes. Range of cultural activities that are literally invisible in this schema. And therefore, we have to put lots of pressure on national policymakers and particularly statisticians to actually provide us with this information. These are important parts that render much of the cultural sector, for all sense and purposes, invisible. And therefore, we can't hope to engage with people outside the cultural sector to say that culture is important if we have no information about it. And oftentimes this has been used as a criticism of culture to say that the data is not there and therefore it's not important. So it's really important to understand the concept of this broader notion of culture and the production process, and that it is slightly different by each area which we call a domain. So, for example, for fine art, I've talked about the sorts of activities that might be involved, have been involved in the production of figures. It's different for music, it's different for computer games, it's different for many different sorts of activities. Now, what this knowledge does is, yes, it makes visible and it allows us to communicate the importance of culture, but also it helps us understand the absence of particular activities. if we go out looking for these activities in a field, and we find that, for example, in music activities, there is a lack of people that will help to archive information, to tell us about the knowledge of the history of music, then we can see that that is a gap. When I was doing work on the music industry in the west of Africa, in Senegal, one of the things that they lacked was an archive of their music. And therefore, they were unable to claim ownership of that music, but also it wasn't a resource that was widely available for them to engage in a conversation or critique with, aside from a few special people who actually embodied and carried this knowledge through society. Okay, so this process of having a wider view of culture and our engagement with it is a central one, I would argue, to understanding what the cultural and creative economy is. And it's separate from the sort of thing that I mentioned, that Geoffrey was talking about, which was the measure of the value of culture in terms of a broader sense. Okay, so this will tell us about the interaction in the economic field, but it won't tell us about the value, which what we have to do then is question a whole number of debates that economics would have us understand, that value is set by a buyer and a seller in a market, yeah, and that somehow that's how the price is set, but that it's actually about a evaluation, ongoing evaluation process that is re-engaged with all of the time along the whole of the production chain and production process. So that's what I wanted to say to you, is that if we want to measure culture, we need to understand it. We need to understand the broad processes by which culture comes into being, and therefore the understanding and making visible all of these activities, bringing to light, recognizing the training, the skills, the expertise that's involved in those activities, rather than simply focusing on the eventual artifact, is an important part. And we need to develop measures and understanding of this field so that we can understand the economic intervention of culture, but that is never going to answer the final question, the holy grail, if you like, that Geoffrey was talking about, of some extended social and cultural value system that lies without this. So there's a tension between those, but that's where I'd like to end, is to say that a plea for a wider understanding of how culture gets to be made and remade, that it's a social act. It's not something that happens either in someone's head or in a small laboratory or studio. It's something that has to be carried out in the whole of society. Okay, I hope that helped. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Andy. Oh, thank you.
Não sei. Eu acho que eu estou falando português. Eu acho que eles não vão pensar que é português, mas tudo bem, vamos tentar. Eu estou bem consciente que eu estou terceiro. Eu vou falar no final deste pequeno fala, eu vou falar sobre diversidade. Olha que diversidade a gente tem aqui. A gente tem 3 homens brancos britânicos em cima de 50 anos que vão falar sobre cultura. Realmente a gente tem que parar agora e vocês têm que falar entre si. Porque lá você vai descobrir sobre as indústrias criativas com muito mais, dessa palavra tão importante, diversidade. E também eu estou consciente que hoje à tarde eu estava substituindo a professora Rosalind Gill. Hoje eu estou substituindo Leandro. Parece que eu sempre estou substituto neste jogo. Eu estou adorando este papel, que chega no final do jogo, sempre faz os gols, não é? Super obrigado à Universidade Federal pelo convite. Desculpa as pessoas que já ouviram isso. A gente sabe que uma repetição, um xerox, tem menos valor do que o original, mas Eu vou fazer o
Deixa
que
eu fazer
posso.
um parêntese só de um segundo.
Eu nem posso
segundo.
jogar.
Que é o seguinte, dizem que as grandes obras de arte são aquelas que realmente quando você usa mais de uma vez, sempre tem um significado diferente. As músicas dos Beatles, os quadros do Van Gogh e as falas de Paul Heritage, Andy Pratt e Geoffrey Crossick, porque certamente essas falas foram repetidas algumas vezes e cada vez que eu ouço, eu capto coisas diferentes.
Olha esse chamoso. Eu falei hoje à tarde que quando nós encontramos a primeira vez, eu estava substituindo outra pessoa, a Pauline Tambling, e a gente encontrou num palco junto em São Paulo para falar sobre as indústrias criativas, mas na verdade eu estava dando o roteiro que eu estava dado pela diretora do Creative and Cultural Skills Agency do governo britânico, para falar estatísticas sobre essa contribuição ao PIB, emprego, essas estatísticas econômicas. E ele absolutamente desmontou meu argumento, que não era meu argumento, falando que se nós apresentarmos esses dados econômicos, se a gente argumenta que a cultura vai contribuir para o crescimento do PIB, e se essa é a nossa missão como artistas, a gente está no jogo errado. Na verdade, quem é mais efetivo neste é começar uma guerra, construir uma fábrica de munição. Isso não é a missão de cultura. Então, foi a ponte disto que a gente conversou esta conversa. Hoje à tarde eu apresentei vários projetos, que eu não vou fazer agora, porque teve 90 minutos hoje à tarde, como um bom jogo, agora eu tenho 10. Mas este ponto de partida eu quero voltar, porque é fundamental nessa relação entre nós como economistas. Eu sou professor de artes cênicas. Eu vou falar este mau português que você tem que aguentar, mas preste atenção bem a essas linguagens que nós estamos ouvindo, como as indústrias criativas precisam desses idiomas diferenciados. O Geoffrey é um grande historiador do século XIX, o Andy é um geógrafo, Leandro é um grande economista, eu sou de artes cênicas, vocês de várias áreas diferenciadas, mas todos nós estamos juntos porque a gente precisa ouvir essas linguagens diferenciadas para entender um pouco mais sobre cultura. Não tem dominância de nenhum do outro, mas todos esses palestrantes lembrando a gente do perigo se um fica mais importante da outra, porque a gente perde nesse jogo. Eu falo, como falei hoje à tarde, que temos que ouvir, além dessas linguagens acadêmicas, de ouvir as rapistas e as repentistas, de ouvir os poetas, os músicos, e nada melhor do que quando o Gilberto Gil era o ministro de Cultura, de saber que a linguagem de arte também é importante. Incrível que a gente tem que falar isso, mas é importante para entender essas coisas sobre como cultura, como arte funciona na sociedade. Eu vou começar, na verdade, com Shakespeare, porque eu sou britânico e porque foi Shakespeare que, na verdade, me trouxe para o Brasil em 91 para a primeira vez. Well, na verdade, foi o British Council que me trouxe para o Brasil, mas Shakespeare ajudou um pouco, porque eu vim para o Brasil para dar uma série de palestras sobre Shakespeare em 1991, sobre as comédias. E desde aquela época, Shakespeare sempre foi um pouco da orientação. Eu sempre acho que é bom que a gente fale sobre nossas bússolas em nossas viagens. Eu vou falar sobre Shakespeare, porque eu quero começar com essa visão desse, o que Shakespeare chama nessa peça da tempestade, do Brave New World, esse mundo novo que pode nascer, que a gente pensa de uma utopia. Em Shakespeare, a gente sabe que foi um grande ladrão, na verdade, ele roubou essa ideia, tanto de Montaigne, tanto de Thomas More, mas tanto da época dos descobrimentos, pensando sobre esses novos mundos que podem nascer. Eu vou citar isto em inglês, porque eu não consigo ler Shakespeare em português, e a gente pode ficar com isso com tradução. In the Commonwealth, I would, by contraries, execute all things, for no kind of traffic would I admit, No name of magistrate. Letters should not be known. Riches, poverty, use of service, none. Contract, succession, born, bound of land, tilth, vineyard, none. No use of metal, corn, or wine, or oil, no occupation. All men idle, and women too, but innocent and pure. No sovereignty. Enquanto a gente está pensando sobre o mundo de trabalho que nós queremos criar para jovens de hoje, parece para mim importante refletir sobre esta ideia de utopia, como Shakespeare faz que Gonzalo reflete na Tempestade, quando ele descreve uma visão que é muito próxima à visão de Thomas More, que criou 100 anos antes de Shakespeare escrever esta peça. Utopia de Thomas More, possivelmente um dos textos filósofos mais importantes na formação de Europa de mais de 300 anos. Shakespeare roubou de Montaigne, Montaigne pegou de Thomas More, mas Thomas More, claro, e Montaigne têm uma relação direta com o Brasil, com este texto, porque Montaigne já teve este contato com os indígenas brasileiros no corte real da França. Então a gente está muito próximo ao Brasil nessa fala. O que é utopia que Thomas More oferece, que Gonzalo está sonhando, que Montaigne está pensando que talvez existe no Brasil? Um mundo de igualdade, um mundo sem vulnerabilidade social. Thomas More e Shakespeare só conseguem localizar esta utopia no mundo fictício, no mundo da imaginação. Montaigne só consegue localizar esta utopia na história desse povo indígena, coitado deles, que chegaram na França na época. Ele inventou para eles. E hoje, um mundo onde não há trabalho, como o Gonzalo fala aqui, um mundo assim realmente é um no place, um lugar que não existe, que, claro, é o significado literal significado de utopia. Enquanto nossas utopias mudaram durante os séculos, como Thomas More e como Shakespeare, ainda nós temos a ideia que imaginação e criatividade podem criar nossos mundos fictícios. E, na verdade, nossas utopias só existem nesse futuro fictício. E isto, o que é nosso sentido de uma nação, um coletivo, um imaginário coletivo que nós criamos. Tanto no Brasil, tanto no Reino Unido. Eu acho que às vezes mais no Brasil, com seu hino nacional maravilhoso que fala do sonho intenso. Eu adoro isso. Talvez por isso eu fiquei 25 anos aqui no Brasil. Porque de viver num país que realmente coloca um sonho intenso como um grito no hino nacional é uma indicação de alguma coisa que me atrai. Eu vou te mostrar um pouco de nossa utopia, que já foi, nossos palestrantes já fizeram referência. Olha a nossa utopia. Eu acho que vocês agora podem identificar a nossa utopia, que aconteceu no 30 de julho de 1997. Então a gente está celebrando 20 anos deste momento histórico, quando Tony Blair convidou Noel Gallagher para 10 Downing Street, para a casa do primeiro-ministro. Isso foi quando esta ideia do Cool Britannia nasceu. Deus me livre. Esta ideia de um Reino Unido que estava olhando para fora, um Reino Unido que realmente teve este, como Andy e Jeff falaram muito bem, esta nova indústria. Desde aquele momento, um pouco antes, eles insistiram de falar sobre esta invenção de uma nova indústria. E se nós tivermos uma nova indústria, claro que a gente deve ter novos trabalhadores. olha, alguns de nossos trabalhadores nesta nova indústria. E esses novos trabalhadores vieram não de fábricas, não vestiram de ternos assim, de ternos bem pinstripe, como a gente fala, com aquelas linhas. Não, eles se vestiram bem diferentes. Eu tenho que falar, como eu falei hoje à tarde, quando Trainspotting está citado neste momento de Cool-Bretanha, não é o conteúdo do filme. Eu acho que Tony Blair não estava pensando que ele quis que todo mundo atua como em Trainspotting, para vocês. Ele está pensando muito mais no nascimento, ou renascimento, da indústria cinematográfica de Inglaterra. E outras capas, este London Rules foi o artigo que realmente lançou essa ideia da centralidade de Londres como parte das indústrias criativas. E esses faz parte do elenco. Olha, Vivienne Westwood, que estava naquele mesmo encontro, Oswald Boateng, o designer, estava no mesmo encontro, Damon Albarn, do Blur, o restaurante de Terence Conran Mezzo, mais sapatos. Você vai pensar que os ingleses estão absolutamente obcecados com sapatos, não é? É um foot fetish dos britânicos. Sapatos. Por que sapatos? Porque uma das figuras mais interessantes neste encontro foi Jimmy Choo. Jimmy Choo, você conhece os sapatos? Sim, conhece, de Sex and the City, não é? Você conhece aqueles sapatos. Esse é um bom exemplo das indústrias criativas. Jimmy Choo foi para um imigrante, este é o sonho intenso da utopia da economia criativa. Jimmy Choo, imigrante de Malásia, vem para Hackney, essa área que todo mundo cita, Shoreditch, Hackney. Ele estuda, não numa universidade, uma escola técnica, ele estuda como fazer esses sapatos, sai da escola técnica e faz o quê? Lá na Hackney, na época, impossível imaginar hoje, ele abriu uma loja, tipo pop-up, numa antiga hospital que não estava sendo usado. Essa ocupação, a ressignificação dos espaços. Ele começa fazendo à mão esses sapatos, e ele tem sorte que é uma das editoras de Vogue, investiu nos sapatos dele, teve 8 páginas no Vogue, que acompanhou além do dinheiro que ela deu. Princesa Diana começou a usar sapatos, elas começaram esse investimento. 10 anos depois, ele vendeu o parte dele na companhia dele, com o nome dele, para 15 milhões de dólares. Em 10 ou 12 anos. Isto é o sonho intenso das indústrias criativas. Mas eu menciono o sapato, porque quando eu estava pensando o que eu ia falar, ontem, Tamara, a editora de Vogue, que investiu, vendeu o restante do negócio para 1,2 bilhões de dólares. Isto mostra esta viagem para mim destes 20 anos, este sapato. São lindos, não são esses sapatos, além de tudo. Este sucesso de exportação, como Andy estava falando, esta ideia que nós temos durante 2 décadas, essas indústrias que estão vendendo a cultura. Isto é tão forte para nós. Mas eu quero também citar um outro texto tão importante na história de política filosófica do Reino Unido, de John Locke, os 2 tratados sobre o governo. For 'tis labor indeed that puts the difference of value on everything. A questão de valor que vem de quem faz. Esse imigrante Jimmy Choo, o valor do trabalho dele. E questionar um pouco, como todos eles já fizeram, como Martin fez ontem no discurso, os dados sobre as indústrias criativas, que revela talvez uma outra realidade sobre este campo. O Martin citou, eu acho que ele estava citando uma pesquisa que foi produzida por um grupo de acadêmicos que vai ser publicado, já está disponível, mas vai ser disponível sobre a indústria criativa, uma análise de labor, de trabalho, chefiado pela Kate Oakley, da Universidade de Leeds, que mostra, em vez de todo este brilho de Jimmy Choo, de Oswald Boateng, de Damon Blur, o que está atrás deste brilho, o que está atrás dessa data econômica, que tem algumas perguntas profundas que a gente tem que fazer e talvez a gente está evitando fazer. Como a economia criativa contribui ou não ao crescimento em nossas liberdades. As liberdades das mulheres, as liberdades das minorias étnicas, as liberdades das pessoas de comunidades de baixa renda. Quando a cultura está pensada como um setor industrial, como está sendo promovido durante esses últimos 20 anos, como este setor cultural performa em relação às outras, aos índices mais normais sobre oportunidades iguais. É possível falar que essa inovação, essa palavra tão chave no léxico das indústrias criativas, é possível que inovação trouxe renovação social, que fez nossa sociedade do Reino Unido menos vulnerável. A gente fala muito sobre o valor simbólico das artes, e Geoffrey lindamente fala sobre isso no relatório. Eu realmente recomendo para todos fazer um download do relatório. E nós temos um reconhecimento geral que este valor fica não simplesmente na consumo dos produtos, mas nos processos que produzem esses produtos. Mas, se isso é verdade, a gente tem que pensar se as práticas das indústrias criativas abrem oportunidades, promovem igualdade, cria um freedom. Sabemos que o setor cultural é visto como uma estratégia de desenvolvimento econômico de cidades deindustrializadas ou pós-industrializadas. Pensamos que as indústrias criativas e culturais oferecem oportunidades para pessoas que não têm as vantagens das outras para entrar nos mercados de trabalho, por causa de raça, por causa do território de onde eles vêm, por causa de gênero. Pensamos que o fator cultural dessas indústrias indica que eles têm uma meritocracia. Mas, como esta pesquisa mostra, que Martin citou ontem, na verdade, o setor cultural é menos diverso em termos de etnicidade, é mais masculino e mais dominado pelas pessoas de alta renda socioeconômica, alta vida socioeconômica. É importante? É importante se esses produtos estão vendendo tão bem. É importante se essa economia criativa traz 84 bilhões para a economia em 2014. É importante esses fatores se realmente nós estamos crescendo 8 vezes mais do que o setor novel. Este eu nem vou mencionar, só para mostrar dados. Leandro sempre me critica quando eu uso dados, então nem vou tentar. Mas essas são algumas das gráficas da pesquisa que foi produzida recentemente, que mostra quanto o setor cultural não representa mulheres, não representa essas etnias diferentes, nem os grupos sociais, em comparação ao geral e em comparação aos outros setores industriais. Por que eu acho que é importante? Ou por que levanta essas perguntas? Para 2 razões. Primeiro, porque esses argumentos econômicos, como Andy e Jeff falaram muito bem, estão sendo usados em geral pela classe artística. o diretor do Teatro Nacional, Nick Heitner, ex-diretor, dos grandes diretores de teatro, um grande artista, um grande cineasta, abriu um artigo no Guardian Newspaper na semana passada, literalmente com esses dados sobre 84 bilhões, como razão por que teatro é importante. Eu acho que isso é uma redução de nossas capacidades de falar sobre nossa cultura, como o Jeff falou exatamente no discurso dele. Este dado também é mais importante, essa reflexão, e pode ser que a gente pode ter uma reflexão muito crítica sobre esta pesquisa, e eu tenho certeza que é um debate, não é simplesmente um fato real. Mas, neste momento específico, a gente não está fazendo exportação somente dos produtos de Jimmy Choo, e Oasis, e Damon Blur, e grunge, e todas as outras coisas. Nós estamos exportando o modelo das indústrias criativas britânicas. E não simplesmente para países europeus, ou para a Austrália, ou para o Canadá, ou para os Estados Unidos. A gente está incluindo a promoção de nosso modelo de indústrias criativas vinculado com nosso desenvolvimento em países do terceiro mundo, países subdesenvolvidos, países no famoso backlist. Faz parte da estratégia de desenvolvimento para esses países para exportar este modelo das indústrias criativas. E Leandro alertou bem, em vários momentos que eu vi, que o modelo britânico não é necessariamente um modelo que vai funcionar para o Brasil, para a América Latina, para Guiné-Bissau, para Moçambique, para Cabo Verde, onde a gente vai. Então, pelo menos, essa pergunta deveria começar: o que as indústrias criativas fizeram durante esses 20 anos para desenvolver a sociedade britânica? Se a gente não pode abrir esta conversa para nós, para pensar sobre igualdade, liberdade e oportunidades, a gente não pode simplesmente promover um modelo que traz muitos benefícios, mas também traz esses tipos de data depois de 20 anos. E hoje à tarde eu tive o grande prazer de compartilhar vários projetos que a gente faz com People's Palace Projects aqui no Brasil, em parceria com, especialmente em parceria com organizações culturais que são baseadas tanto nas favelas, nas periferias, tanto no Xingu, com o povo indígena, tanto na Liga de Quadrilha de Acre. Mas eu tenho um grande orgulho que agora nós temos 2 projetos super importantes para nós com o Necult, sobre essas questões de valor, sobre esta questão de como as indústrias criativas, os modelos de cultura aqui no Brasil, pode, através da troca, tanto a troca de Inglaterra, tanto a troca dentro das próprias cidades, que valor traz essa troca às indústrias criativas. Eu quero terminar. Desculpa, esqueci de mostrar isso. Olha, esses são os exemplos de nossos que saíram na semana passada. Se você não acredita que temos problema de igualdade nas indústrias criativas, olha o que o BBC publicou na semana passada, mostrando a diferença no BBC, quanto eles pagam para mulheres e quanto eles pagam para homens. Imagino que são um pouco nas notícias aqui. Mas eu quero terminar não com o BBC, não com Shakespeare, eu quero terminar com minha culto e com português. Minha culto, o grande romancista de Moçambique, além de ser um dos maiores escritores atualmente, ele é biólogo. De profissão, ele é biólogo. Então, ele entende como grande biólogo que diversidade é o que faz a espécie humana sobreviver e resiste. E ele faz este apelo tanto na área cultural, tanto na área de biologia. O que faz a espécie humana sobreviver não foi apenas a inteligência, mas a nossa capacidade de produzir diversidade. E uma das coisas que a gente conversou hoje à tarde é como os modelos das indústrias criativas que a gente seguiu durante os últimos 20 anos talvez reduziu a diversidade de nossa cultura em vez de aumentar a diversidade. E se a gente segue a linha onde a gente reduz esta diversidade, a gente está perdido como espécie. E, então, eu terminei com 3 slides que mostram um pouco dessa diversidade, porque para mim isto eu não preciso falar para você tanto, isto é a riqueza do Brasil, como Gilberto Gil falou no discurso inicial dele, do Ministério, que o Brasil é Brasil porque é o diverso. É diferente de Inglaterra, que sempre tem que ter política de diversidade. Diversidade parece uma coisa utópica para nós, que a gente tem que chegar lá. Sempre tem que chegar lá na diversidade. Gil falou tão lindamente sobre como o Brasil é Brasil porque é diverso. Interessante que essas fotos... Você conhece essa diversidade brasileira? Que é interessante para mim, todas essas fotos estão tiradas de um fotógrafo só, do Complexo da Maré, do Observatório das Favelas, que viajou no Brasil para captar essa diversidade. A beleza, para mim, parece não simplesmente do que ele está olhando, mas no olhar que ele tem sobre esses lugares, para ver beleza na diversidade do Brasil nesses momentos, nessas cores e nesse sonho intenso de ser o Brasil. Obrigado.
Obrigado, Paul. Obrigado, Paul. Obrigado, Andy. Obrigado, Jeff. Bom, temos espaço para 2 ou 3 perguntas no máximo. Então, rapidamente vou passar a palavra para vocês. As perguntas podem ser em português ou em inglês. Fiquem à vontade nas 2 línguas, porque tem tradução.
Boa noite, eu gostaria de agradecer a fala de todos, eu gostei bastante inspirador. E, bom, aproveitando, principalmente Geoffrey, que é historiador, eu gostaria de saber, eu fui na palestra hoje de manhã, e a gente viu muitos dos relatórios da Unesco, são relatórios recentes, e eu gostaria de saber se é possível medir empiricamente a importância da economia da cultura em décadas passadas, se a gente tem como fazer uma medição que não seja só com dados econômicos, que é o que geralmente a gente vê, se existe um método para fazer esse tipo de medição, ou saber empiricamente a importância da economia da cultura, não agora, mas no tempo passado.
Mais alguma pergunta? Perfeito.
Okay, so the question was whether it's possible to look in terms of the past about measuring the cultural economy. The problem is that the data that is collected in censuses is not precise or detailed enough to be able to identify many of the activities of the cultural economy. I have been able to look at census material for the UK back to about 1920. So it's possible to be able to map this transformation, but it's very, very difficult because as I mentioned before, when I was talking about the details of shoemaking compared to computer games, many of these activities didn't exist and they certainly weren't measured. I think we know more generally about the transformation of many of our economies and about the way that, for example, manufacturing industry has tended to decline. We've had the growth in both service activities, but also the growth in the cultural economy, and that's important. But it's very difficult, almost impossible, to actually go backwards because it was, if you like, below the horizon. People weren't recognizing it, and therefore they weren't measuring it. So this is the issue now, is with any new activity that it takes a long time for people to actually recognize that it's important, and then invest the money in actually analyzing it and creating some reliable indicators.
Could I add something? As a historian who's thought a lot about the way in which data is gathered at different times. The data that is gathered, officially gathered and therefore published, is gathered because of the ideological, political, intellectual needs of various people at the time, usually those who are in power, those who are in government, those who are in professional elites. It is not that people in the 19th century were less intelligent than us. They just wanted to know different things. And so one of the problems, and I agree with Andy completely, that there's a need, there's always a difficulty in data collection catching up with changes in the real world. But I'd want to add something more to that, which is that it is not simply a positivistic need to find the right data. All data is created because certain people want that data because they think it is a valuable way of analyzing society and analyzing the economy. And that simply changes over time. So even if you look at 19th century censuses in Britain, they look absurd. You ask, well, why have they categorized occupations like that? They shouldn't have done it. Well, they should have done it because it was what interested them. It just doesn't interest us. And that's what makes history so interesting, I think. But it's why what you're asking for can't be done. But the only reassurance I can give you is that in 50 years' time, somebody will be asking the same question about why 50 years ago they didn't collect the right data. We did.
Porque, claro que eu não sou historiador, você percebeu. Mas, na verdade, o Shakespeare, nosso entendimento de Shakespeare, meu entendimento dos textos de Shakespeare, que eles fazem parte da nossa história da economia de cultura. Porque a gente não teria os textos de Shakespeare se não fosse para transações econômicas, para o fato que 8 pessoas se reuniram 8 anos depois da morte dele para unir esses textos, esses 36 que estão na folha, para vender aqueles textos, dando uma ideia clara do valor cultural. A gente não teria os outros quartos antes, o que já chamaram os bad quarters, os quartos que não eram bem feitos. Por que eles não são bem feitos? Porque os atores saíram da companhia e venderam a lembrança do texto que eles tiveram. Quando Shakespeare viu o Bad Quarter do Hamlet, ele publica o Good Quarter, que a gente chama o Good Quarter, versão de Hamlet. Então, transações, como Andy falou muito bem, em volta de qualquer ato de arte tem essas transações. E, na verdade, o teatro não ia existir naquele sentido se não fosse para o fato que quase para a primeira vez na história pessoas começaram a vender o ato de performance e tiveram que fechar o teatro para ter uma porta para vender este produto que eles chamaram de Shakespeare. Eu acho que nós temos que pensar de teatro na época do Renaissance como se fosse videogame. Porque, na verdade, o formato não existia antes daquelas incríveis companhias em Londres, Lisboetano, para vender cultura. Mas, como Geoffrey falou muito bem, a evidência fica em outros lugares, fica nos partes arqueológicos, ou fica nos arquivos da companhia, ou fica no texto original. E eu tive o grande favor que a gente faz um projeto chamado Shakespeare Forum, unindo pessoas para falar. Uma das pessoas mais brilhantes que falou sobre Shakespeare foi Gustavo Franco, o ex-diretor do Banco Central, que trouxe o real para o Brasil na época do Fernando Henrique. E tem um novo filme sobre Gustavo. Que filme! Mas ele fala sobre exatamente isso, sobre a economia de cultura na época de Shakespeare e também de Machado de Assis, né? Ele faz. Então, eu acredito que através de outros textos que não sejam tão econômicos, a gente ainda está aprendendo sobre a função de cultura na sociedade.
Obrigado, Paul. Obrigado, Andy. Obrigado, Jeff. Realmente, infelizmente, nós precisamos encerrar, porque temos o nosso teto. Não, então vamos encerrar com outra coisa. Então, uma pequena frase para encerrar. Vamos encerrar com um grande agradecimento e com um grande sentimento de ideias borbulhando depois de uma semana bastante cheia de referências, de informações, e eu sinto que nós realmente estamos caminhando para o início de um bom debate sobre um modelo de indústrias criativas, não só para o Brasil, mas talvez para o mundo como um todo. Eu acho que essa autorreflexão que a Inglaterra faz, essa reflexão que diversos países da América Latina e América do Sul estão fazendo, eu acredito que pode nos posicionar num ambiente de transformação, considerando o contexto em que o mundo vive hoje, de fechamento, de um debate sobre, inclusive, revisão da integração comercial que o mundo vivia até então. Então, eu acho que a emergência desse tipo de debate ela é fundamental. E eu estou muito feliz com tudo que aconteceu durante essa semana. Agradeço a todos vocês que participaram de todos os momentos e principalmente aos nossos palestrantes. E queria registrar que esse conteúdo foi disponibilizado em live streaming e nós, se tudo der certo, vamos conseguir produzir algum conteúdo em vídeo para disseminar para o futuro. Muito obrigado a todos e até o próximo evento.